Hello! Here we go with changing the subject, okay? We also call this rearranging formulae. Both get used really, doesn't seem to be much of a preferred term. So I've got an example here to start us off with. I've got quite a few though, okay, of different styles, okay? So you're going to get a real nice, kind of a broad range of examples here. This first one, I want to make W the subject, okay? I want to make W the subject. So you'll be told that, change the subject of the formula to W, and that's what we're going to do here. Now, the way that we approach these is to actually look at how we would solve this, okay? Now, that is really why we study solving equations before rearranging formulae, okay? Because it's very, very similar. We just don't know all the numbers. So if, for example, I'm just going to put a bit of an aside here, maybe another piece of paper actually. If I had numbers in here and I had, instead of A, I had the number 8, and instead of L, I had the number 4. Okay, remember that these are being multiplied together. So I'm just going to put that time sign in. And I asked you to solve that for W. I think you'd all leap in and say, we divide by 4. Okay, and so we get left with 2 equals W because we've divided by 4 on both sides. Okay, and that is exactly what we're going to do here. But the only difference is we don't know the numbers. So instead of dividing by 4, I'm going to have to divide by L. And that's okay. We're essentially writing down what we're going to do when we know what the numbers are. Okay, so let's have a look. We want to get the W on its own, that's our purpose. So highlight it or put a colourful box around it or something just to remind you that's the one you're working with. And what do I do to get rid of it? Or I kind of like to say we look at the story of the W, okay? And that becomes more and more helpful the more of these that we do. So we're starting off with our W. What are we doing to it? We're timesing it by L. So we do the inverse of that, the opposite, which is to divide by L. Okay, and to divide by L on both sides, remember. And I'm going to show you like all the reasons of what happens here. I'm not going to do that on the following pages of this, because actually in reality we don't bother doing it. But we get A divided by L equals, oh, missed out the W, W times L divided by L. Okay, now if we do W times L divided by L, we just end up with a W. These, we call it cancelling out. What actually happens is they divide and give us 1, but anything times by 1 doesn't change. But we don't, you'll hear the expression cancel out, and they do. The L divided by L means that they both disappear. So we end up with A over L equals W. And we've done, now W is the subject. W is the variable that's all on its own now, and that's what we were trying to get. Okay, so that's one of them. Now on the next ones I'm not going to necessarily show all of these details, because in reality we don't tend to write them all out. This time I would like to make G the subject, okay? Now don't forget, in a question you would be given which variable. I'm not just making one up. I want to make G the subject here. So what is G's story? We've got G and we're dividing it by A. So we do the inverse, okay? The inverse of dividing by A is to multiply by A. So we do it to both sides, multiply by A, okay? We get G divided by A times A, as I multiply by A, equals B multiplied by A. Okay, now like on the last page, if you've got G divided by A and then times by A, it's just going to be G. These two things kind of undo each other. These are inverses. So we just get G on this side, and B multiplied by A is, to simplify, we don't bother putting in that multiplication sign, we just put BA. And even better, if you can, remember to put them alphabetically, and we're going to write AB instead. It's the same thing, same as, 2 times 5 is the same answer as 5 times 2, for example. Okay, and now G is the subject, it's all on its own, and that's what we're aiming for. Now then, they're your first ones. They only take one step to do these, okay, one step. They do get a little more complicated, however, okay, but we're going to follow the exact same thing. So in this one here, I want to make B the subject, okay? I want to make B the subject, so I'm going to highlight it, I'm going to box it off there. That's the one I'm looking for to get on its own. So I'm going to tell the story of B. So I've got my b here. What am I doing to it first? I'm multiplying it by g, and then I'm adding y. Now, the important thing about the story of b is, when we undo it, we have to start at the end of the story. Okay, we have to start at the end of the story. So b is being multiplied by g, and we're adding y. So the first thing we have to undo is the y. That's the last thing that happened in its story. So instead of adding y, we do the inverse and we subtract y from both sides. So subtract y, subtract y. Okay, I'll do that in a different colour so you know it's not kind of part of my writing. So we end up with here, GB plus y. I've written out the entire thing, subtract y, equals S subtract y. And all I've done is done both sides and I've subtracted y off them both. Okay, so let's just see, can we tidy this up a little bit? We've actually got GB, add y, take away y. Well, they just go 0, don't they? Something take away itself is 0, so we get left with just GB. And S subtract y, we can't do anything with that, that's just going to stay as S subtract y. Okay, let's go back to b and its story. And right now, we've just got b is being multiplied by g. So again, we do the inverse of that. We don't multiply it by g, we now divide it by g. Okay, and we divide each side by g. Okay, and that leaves us with GB divided by g equals S minus y. And be careful here, okay, divided by g. Make sure you're dividing everything on this side by g, not just the S, not just the y, everything has got to be divided by the g. Okay, and on this side again, you might start to recognise these a bit faster now. We've actually got b is being times by g and then divided by g, which means it's just b. Okay, these two things get rid of each other, okay, because g divided by g is just 1 and b times 1 is just b. So we just get left with b equals S minus y over g. And that's it. Now don't panic. A lot of people go, but that's not an answer. I just want a number for an answer. That's not how these questions work. This is your answer. That is perfectly fine. Don't try and squeeze things together and get rid of bits. That's the answer as it is. Now, the way I've written these here, I'm not going to do it on the next one. Okay? Because actually, these steps, as long as you know why they work, I'm happy for, you know, it's quite generally assumed in maths that it works. You don't need to prove it works. Okay? So, on the next one, I'm going to talk you through it. So this time we've got 5k minus L equals M. So at the moment, M is the subject here, but I don't want it to be the subject. I would like K to be the subject. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the K and tell its story. We've got K and we are multiplying it by 5 and then subtracting L. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that L, and the inverse of subtracting L is to add L. Okay, so we're going to plus L plus L. Now we already know from the last one, if I do subtracting L and then adding L, it just disappears. So I'm not going to write all of that out, I'm just going to write 5k, because we know that if we add L to this, the L's just disappear. Okay, and I'm happy for that to kind of be a given. Equals M plus L. Okay, let's just box those off so they don't get mixed in. Okay, so I've just not written in that step. So like you see what we did here, we wrote out this and then put the minus y, and then we said, well, actually those y's disappear, so we don't need them. I've just missed out that step. Now if you want to write that step in, brilliant, that's not a problem. That's not a problem at all. Okay, you can write that step in. Now then, we need to still be looking at the k, because that's the one we want to make the subject. So k is being multiplied by 5. So the inverse of that is to divide by 5 on both sides. Divide by 5. So k multiplied by 5 and then divided by 5 just leaves us with k on its own. And again on this side, remember, we've got to divide the entire side, all of it. Make sure that division line goes underneath all of that by 5. And we've done. K is now the subject. Right then, let's try a slightly different style. This one's got brackets in, but don't panic, it's okay. Right, it's okay. I want to make x the subject. Okay, I want to make x the subject of this this formula. So the first thing, let's have a look at x's story. Okay, let's highlight it off there. we've got x, and we're adding z, because remember we've got bid mass, okay, we have to do the add z first because of the brackets. X add z, and then all of that is being multiplied by y. So the first thing we've got to do is to undo this multiplying by y. So we divide by y. Divide by y on both sides. Remember, it's got to be on both sides, otherwise that equal sign doesn't mean anything anymore, because it won't be equal. So all of this here has been multiplied by y and then divided by y, which means we just get left with the x plus z. Okay, because x plus z all multiplied by y, then all divided by y just leaves x plus z, because otherwise cancel each other out. And that equals w divided by y. And that's okay, that's perfectly fine to leave that one like that. Right then, now we're still looking for the x, and at the moment we've got x plus z. Okay, that's what we're looking for. X plus z. So the inverse of plus z is to subtract z. Okay, so we're going to subtract z here and subtract z here. And as we've seen on the last examples, x plus z subtract z is just going to be x. That's now on its own. And then w over y subtract z. Okay, it just ends up looking like that. Because that would be a bit like saying a half subtract 2, or something like that. Okay, we just write it out like that. So w over y subtract z. And we've done. X is the subject. A couple more. I think I've just got 2 more after this. Okay, so with this one here, this just throws some people off because they're not sure about this squared and what to do with it, okay? So we're going to make sure we're happy with that now. Now, we're going to rearrange this to make A the subject. And it almost looks like A is the subject, but it's not because of this squared, okay? It's not quite there. Now, A's story is that A, because remember we just want the A, not the squared bit. A is being squared. Now, be careful, a lot of people say, well, the inverse of that is to divide by 2, and it's not. The inverse of that is to square root. Okay, you've got to be really careful there, okay? Once you've remembered that, you're sorted. That you'll be fine. The inverse of squaring is to square root. So we square root both sides, and we just get left with A equals the square root of B. Because the square root of A squared is just A, because those two things undo each other. So we get A equals the square root of B, and you've done. That's a really nice one, as long as you're happy with that square root situation. Okay, and then the last one that I've got here for you is a little bit different. I'd like to make B the subject. And the reason this is a bit different is because we've already got a 3A over here, and that just throws the people off a little bit. So B's story is that B is being multiplied by 2 and A is being added to it. So first thing, we're going to undo this adding of A. Okay, so we're going to subtract A, subtract A. So we get left with 2B equals 3A subtract A, which we can actually simplify a bit, because 3A subtract A is just 2A. Okay, that makes life a little bit easier, doesn't it? So once we've done that, we then need to look at B again, and B has been multiplied by 2, so we're going to divide by 2 this time. Divide by 2, divide by 2. We get B, because 2B divided by 2 is just B, equals 2A divided by 2. Now that's interesting, isn't it? Because actually, 2A divided by 2 is also just A. Okay, so in this case we actually find that B equals A, which is lovely and neat, isn't it? I mean, it's much nicer than all of this. So enjoy practicing with those. Let me know how you get on.